The sound of fists pounding on Marcus Webb's front door at 7:30 on a Saturday morning could wake the entire neighborhood. The 42-year-old construction project manager stood in his kitchen, coffee mug halfway to his lips, watching through the window as Jennifer Hartwell, his neighbor of 3 months, hammered away with the entitled fury of someone who believed the world owed her everything. Behind her, 3 kids bounced impatiently on his front lawn, already in their swimsuits despite the early hour. Marcus had drained and covered his pool 2 weeks ago after the city cited him for permit violations on the aging filtration system. He'd been peaceful about it, posted a notice, planned repairs for spring. But Jennifer Hartwell didn't care about permits or property rights or basic human decency. For 14 days, she'd complained, demanded, and finally threatened legal action if he didn't reopen community resources for her children's enjoyment. But today, watching her bang on his door like she owned the place, something shifted in Marcus's chest. Today, he stopped being patient. Today, he decided to show Jennifer Hartwell exactly what happens when you push a construction manager with connections, creativity, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Before we dive into how Marcus turned his backyard into the most epic response to entitled behavior you've ever seen, if you love stories where property owners take back their power and justice gets served with style, smash that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. This is a story in 3 parts. The harassment that transformed a patient man into someone who refused to be bullied, the confrontation where power shifted completely and a neighbor learned she'd picked the wrong property to covet, and the resolution where creative justice proved more satisfying than any legal victory could ever be. The first part takes us through 2 weeks of relentless pressure from a neighbor who believed her. Children's summer entertainment trumped property rights and city regulations. We'll see Marcus endure increasingly aggressive demands, watch his attempts at reasonable explanation fall on deaf ears, and witness the moment when a hard-working man who'd spent 20 years building things for others decided it was time to build something just for himself. The toll of constant harassment, the frustration of being treated like a public servant on his own property, and the breaking point that sparked an idea so brilliant it would become neighborhood legend. The second part reveals the confrontation that changed everything. The morning Marcus caught Jennifer trespassing in his backyard, measuring his covered pool and taking photos for her supposed legal case. The moment he revealed he knew exactly what she'd been planning, exactly how far she intended to push, and exactly how he was going to respond. The power shift was immediate and absolute. As Jennifer realized the quiet construction manager she'd been harassing had resources, knowledge, and a plan she never saw coming. The third part shows justice delivered with hammers, concrete, and half-pipes. How Marcus transformed his backyard into something that made Jennifer's demands permanently impossible, while creating something the community actually appreciated. The unexpected allies who joined his project, the moment Jennifer understood she'd lost completely, and the lasting consequences of trying to bully someone who builds things for a living. This is a story about property rights, creative problem-solving, and what happens when entitled demands meet immovable resolve. Here's exactly how it happened. Marcus Webb had bought the house on Riverside Drive 3 years ago specifically for the pool. At 42, the construction project manager had spent 2 decades building high-rises and commercial complexes across the state, supervising crews of 50 or more, managing million-dollar budgets with precision. His own home was his sanctuary, a modest 3-bedroom ranch with a 20-by-40-foot in-ground pool that had been installed in the 80s. The filtration system was original. The tiles around the edge were cracking, and the pump made concerning noises that Marcus knew meant replacement, not repair. He lived alone after his divorce 2 years prior, worked 60-hour weeks, and spent his rare free time maintaining the property himself. The pool represented relaxation, peace, the reward for decades of hard labor under unforgiving sun. When the city inspector red-tagged his filtration system in early September, citing outdated components and potential contamination risks, Marcus had accepted it with professional understanding. Regulations existed for reasons. He'd get proper permits, hire licensed contractors, do it right. Spring installation, $12,000, worth every penny. Jennifer Hartwell had moved in next door in late June with her 3 children, ages 7, 9, and 11, and an attitude that suggested the neighborhood should reorganize itself around her convenience. She was 36, worked remotely for some tech company, and had immediately begun surveying the street like a general assessing resources. Within a week of arrival, she'd asked Marcus about pool access for her kids. He'd politely declined, explaining it was his private property and he preferred to swim alone. She'd smiled tightly, said she understood, then asked again 3 days later, and again the following week. Each time her tone grew sharper, her arguments more elaborate. The kids needed exercise. The community should share resources. He was home so rarely, why not let them use it when he was at work? Marcus remained firm but cordial, feeling increasingly uncomfortable in his own backyard as 3 pairs of eyes watched him from the neighboring deck. The first incident happened the day after he posted the closure notice. Marcus had come home from a job site at 6 in the evening, exhausted from mediating a supplier dispute, and found Jennifer standing at his back gate with a stack of papers. She'd printed out articles about community property laws, homeowner association rules from neighborhoods that actually had HOAs, and a petition signed by 4 other families demanding he reopen the pool. Marcus didn't live in an HOA neighborhood. The petition was meaningless. He'd explained this calmly, professionally, the way he spoke to difficult clients. Jennifer's face had flushed red. She'd called him selfish, said her children were devastated, accused him of deliberately timing the closure to ruin their summer. When he'd pointed out that September wasn't summer and city regulations weren't optional, she'd actually stomped her foot like a child before storming away. The second incident escalated 8 days later. Marcus woke to find Jennifer's eldest son, Tyler, standing on his pool cover, testing whether it would hold his weight. The boy saw Marcus at the window and waved cheerfully, as if trespassing was perfectly normal behavior. Marcus had gone outside immediately, kept his voice level despite the anger building in his chest, and asked the kid to leave his property. Tyler had shrugged and complied, but 20 minutes later, Jennifer appeared at his door claiming Marcus had yelled at her child and threatened him. The accusation was completely false, but she'd already posted about it in the neighborhood social media group, painting Marcus as an aggressive man who hated children. 3 neighbors he barely knew commented with concerned emojis. Marcus, who'd never been in a physical confrontation in his adult life, found himself defending his character to strangers because he'd asked a trespasser to leave his yard. The breaking point arrived on a Wednesday morning, 2 weeks after the closure. Marcus had taken a rare day off to meet with contractors about the pool repair permits when he discovered Jennifer in his backyard at 7:15 in the morning, measuring his pool with a tape measure and taking photographs on her phone. She wasn't startled when he appeared. She looked defiant, entitled, as if she had every right to be there. Marcus asked what she thought she was doing. Jennifer informed him she was documenting evidence for her lawyer that she intended to sue him for creating an attractive nuisance by having a pool and then denying neighborhood children access to it. The legal theory was nonsense. Any first-year law student could have told her that, but she spoke with absolute confidence. She told Marcus he'd be hearing from her attorney within 48 hours, turned on her heel, and walked back through the gate she'd apparently picked. Marcus stood there in his own backyard, in the space he'd worked 20 years to afford, and felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd tried being reasonable. He'd tried being patient. He'd tried explaining regulations, boundaries, and basic respect for private property. Jennifer Hartwell didn't care about any of it. She wanted what she wanted, and she believed her wants outweighed his rights. Marcus walked back inside, poured a second cup of coffee, and sat at his kitchen table thinking. He'd spent 2 decades building things, creating structures where none existed before. He knew contractors, suppliers, city planners. He understood permits, regulations, and property law better than most lawyers. And as he sat there, turning his coffee mug slowly in his hands, an idea began forming. An idea so perfect, so absolute in its solution to Jennifer's harassment, that he actually laughed out loud for the first time in weeks. If Jennifer wanted to make demands about his pool, if she wanted to threaten legal action over property that belonged to him, if she wanted to make his life difficult over something she had no right to, then Marcus would make sure her demands became permanently, spectacularly impossible to fulfill. He pulled out his laptop and began making calls. His first was to Tom Richardson, a contractor who owed him a favor from a job Marcus had saved 3 years ago. His second was to the city planning office, where he'd worked with the same permit coordinator for a decade. His third was to a supplier who could get him materials at cost. By noon, Marcus had permits approved for a backyard renovation project. By 3 in the afternoon, Tom's crew had committed to starting the following Monday. And by the time Jennifer's fake legal threat arrived via email that evening, Marcus was already beyond caring. Let her threaten. Let her complain. In 72 hours, she'd understand exactly what happened when you pushed someone who built things for a living. The confrontation came Saturday morning at 8 o'clock. Earlier than Marcus expected, but perfectly timed nonetheless. He was in his backyard reviewing the site plan with Tom Richardson when Jennifer appeared at the gate, her phone already recording, her voice pitched loud enough for the entire street to hear. She demanded to know what he was doing, why there was construction equipment in his driveway, whether he had permits for whatever project he was planning. Marcus looked up from the blueprints spread across his patio table and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile he wore when a difficult client finally gave him the opening he'd been waiting for. He invited her in. Jennifer's confidence faltered for just a moment, suspicion flickering across her face, but her need to control the situation won out. She stepped into his backyard, phone still recording, and approached the covered pool. Marcus gestured for Tom to stay where he was and walked over to Jennifer with deliberate calm. He told her she'd been right about one thing. He was making changes to his pool, big changes, permanent changes. Changes that would make her weeks of harassment, her threats, her trespassing, and her legal posturing completely pointless. Jennifer's eyes narrowed. She asked what that meant. Marcus pulled the permits from his back pocket and unfolded them slowly, letting her read the header. Application for residential sports court construction. Permanent pool decommissioning and fill. Concrete skate park installation. Jennifer's face went white. She looked from the permit to Marcus to the covered pool and back again, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Marcus explained in the measured tone he used with contractors who'd made expensive mistakes. She'd made this very simple for him, really. She'd spent 2 weeks making demands about his pool, threatening legal action, trespassing on his property, and generally making his life miserable. So he'd decided to eliminate the problem at its source. No pool meant no more complaints about pool access. No more trespassing kids testing the pool cover. No more entitled neighbor acting like his private property was her personal recreation center. Jennifer found her voice then, shrill and desperate. She insisted he couldn't do this, that it was spite, that she'd report him for harassment. Marcus let her finish, then pulled out his phone. He showed her the timeline he'd documented meticulously over the past 2 weeks. Photos of her son on his pool cover, time-stamped. Screenshots of her social media posts making false accusations about him. Security camera footage of her trespassing in his yard that morning with a tape measure. The email she'd sent threatening to sue him for an attractive nuisance claim that any lawyer would laugh at. He'd documented everything because that's what project managers did. They created paper trails. They protected themselves with evidence. Then Marcus told Jennifer something that made her go even paler. Her full name was Jennifer Lynn Hartwell. She was 36 years old and lived at 847 Riverside Drive. She worked remotely for DataCore Solutions as a customer experience coordinator, a position she'd held for 4 years. Her children attended Riverside Elementary, where Marcus had connections through his company's volunteer work. Her homeowner's insurance was through State Farm, and he knew this because he'd seen the paperwork through her window when she'd left her blinds open during one of her social media rant sessions about him. He'd done his homework, just like she'd tried to do hers with those ridiculous community property articles. Jennifer's phone was shaking now. She demanded to know why he'd been investigating her, accused him of stalking, threatened to call law enforcement. Marcus remained absolutely calm. He explained he hadn't investigated anything that wasn't publicly available or visible from the street. But unlike her, he'd actually understood the laws he was referencing. Property rights in their state were absolute. He could do whatever he wanted with his pool as long as he had permits, which he did. Her threats of legal action were empty because attractive nuisance claims required proving negligence, and he'd secured and posted closure notices the day after the city inspection. Her trespassing, on the other hand, was documented, time-stamped, and technically criminal. Marcus laid out her options then, his voice never rising above conversation level. Option 1, she could continue complaining, threatening, and making his life difficult. In that case, he'd proceed with the skate park exactly as planned, and send her a bill for the time he'd spent documenting her harassment, and the legal consultation he'd paid for regarding her baseless, attractive nuisance claim. The bill would be itemized, professional, and legally sound. He'd also share the security footage with the neighborhood social media group she loved so much, along with her false accusations about him yelling at her children. Let everyone see who the real problem neighbor was. Option 2, she could accept that his property was his property, stop the harassment immediately, and stay off his land permanently. In return, he'd proceed with the skate park but allow neighborhood kids to use it once it was complete, with signed parental permission forms, scheduled time slots, and helmet requirements he'd enforce strictly. Her children could participate if they followed the rules everyone else followed. No special treatment, no demands, no entitlement. Just basic respect for boundaries and property rights. Jennifer tried one more protest, her voice cracking. She insisted she'd just been trying to give her children a nice summer, that Marcus was overreacting, that this was all too extreme. Marcus cut her off with a single gesture. He pointed to the covered pool behind them and told her that every single interaction they'd had about this pool had been her overreacting. He'd politely declined access initially. She'd escalated. He'd explained city regulations. She'd created a petition. He'd asked her son not to trespass. She'd made false accusations online. He'd tried patience. She'd broken into his yard to photograph evidence for a fake legal claim. This wasn't extreme. This was consequence. This was what happened when someone spent 2 weeks learning they couldn't bully a man who spent his career solving problems professionally, Tom. Richardson had watched this entire exchange with barely concealed amusement. He cleared his throat and reminded Marcus they had a full day of prep work ahead. Marcus nodded, then looked at Jennifer one final time. He asked which option she was choosing. Jennifer looked at the permit, at the pool, at Marcus's calm expression, and finally at Tom's crew arriving with equipment. She chose option 2 in a whisper Marcus barely heard. He told her that was wise. Then he asked her to leave his property and not return unless she had children who'd signed up for supervised skate park hours once construction was complete. Jennifer walked back through the gate. her shoulders hunched, her phone dangling forgotten in her hand. Marcus watched her go, then turned to Tom with a genuine smile for the first time in weeks. Tom shook his head, grinning, and asked if Marcus had planned this entire thing just to make a point. Marcus considered the question, then admitted the transformation took 6 weeks, working mostly on weekends with Tom's crew. They drained the pool completely first, then began the filling process with engineered filled dirt compacted in careful layers. Marcus supervised every stage personally, the way he'd supervised hundreds of construction projects over his career, ensuring quality control and code compliance. The neighborhood watched with fascination. People stopped on their walks to ask questions. Kids peered through the fence with curious eyes. And Jennifer Hartwell stayed conspicuously inside her house, blinds drawn, silent for the first time since she'd moved in. The concrete work began in week 3. Tom's crew built forms for bowls, quarter pipes, and grinding rails, creating a flowing design that utilized the pool's natural depth for vertical elements. Marcus had consulted with actual skaters during the design phase, teenagers from the community center where his company volunteered. They'd contributed ideas enthusiastically, grateful that an adult was creating legitimate skating space in a neighborhood that had none. The design incorporated safety features mandated by current sports facility codes: smooth transitions, proper coping, adequate run-up space, and clear sight lines throughout. The complication arrived during week 4, on a Tuesday afternoon when Marcus was at his actual job site. Tom called him with barely suppressed laughter in his voice. Jennifer had apparently called the city planning office that morning, claiming Marcus was building an unpermitted commercial facility intended to devalue her property. The planning coordinator had called Tom directly to verify, and Tom had sent over all their approved permits, the engineering reports, and the insurance documentation. But the coordinator had also mentioned that Jennifer had specifically claimed the project was revenge-motivated harassment, which technically could trigger a review if she filed formal complaints. Marcus drove back to Riverside Drive during his lunch break, parked in his driveway, and walked next door. He knocked on Jennifer's door calmly, professionally, and waited. When she finally answered, she looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her confidence from months ago completely gone. Marcus told her that he'd received word about her call to city planning. He wanted to be absolutely clear about something before this went any further. Every permit was in order. Every regulation was being followed. The project had been reviewed and approved by the same planning office she'd just called. If she wanted to file formal harassment complaints, he'd welcome the opportunity to present his documentation of her behavior to an official mediator. Alternatively, she could stop trying to interfere with legal construction on his property and accept that this was happening. Jennifer's face crumpled. She admitted she didn't actually have a lawyer, that she'd been overwhelmed trying to entertain 3 kids alone while working full-time, that the pool had seemed like such a simple solution when she'd first asked. The harassment and demands had spiraled out of control because she'd felt powerless to make Marcus see reason. She'd never had someone simply refuse her requests before, and she'd responded badly. Very badly. She was sorry. Genuinely, actually sorry. Marcus studied her for a long moment. He told her apology accepted, but actions mattered more than words. She could demonstrate real change by respecting boundaries going forward and teaching her children to do the same. Then he surprised her. He pulled out 3 parental permission forms for the skate park and offered them to her. When it opened, her kids could use it like everyone else. Supervised hours, helmet requirements, respect for the space, and other users. No special treatment, but no exclusion either. Jennifer took the forms with shaking hands and thanked him quietly. Marcus nodded and left. He'd won. But he'd also chosen not to grind Jennifer into the ground after victory, and that felt more satisfying than continued punishment ever could. The grand opening happened on a Saturday in late October, 6 weeks after construction began. Marcus had organized it like the professional project completion ceremony it was. He'd invited the mayor, who'd cut the ribbon with enthusiasm. The local news covered it as a human interest story about community building and private-public cooperation. 37 kids showed up that first day, with helmets and parental permission forms, their excitement palpable as they explored the bowls and rails. Marcus had hired 2 experienced skaters as weekend supervisors and established clear rules posted prominently. Helmets mandatory. No aggressive behavior. Respect the equipment and each other. Scheduled time slots to prevent overcrowding. Tyler Hartwell, Jennifer's 11-year-old son, arrived during the afternoon session with his younger siblings. He approached Marcus hesitantly and apologized for standing on the pool cover weeks ago. He'd thought it was funny at the time, but he understood now that he'd been trespassing and risking damage to property that wasn't his. Marcus appreciated the apology and told Tyler he could use the skate park just like everyone else. The kid lit up, then asked something that surprised Marcus. He wanted to know if Marcus needed any help maintaining the space, maybe picking up trash or reporting problems. Marcus considered the offer, recognized genuine remorse when he saw it, and told Tyler to come by next Saturday morning. They'd discuss volunteer opportunities for kids who wanted to help keep the park in good condition. The unexpected outcome emerged over the following months. The skate park became a genuine neighborhood hub. Parents thanked Marcus for creating safe recreational space their kids loved. Property values on Riverside Drive actually increased slightly as the park gained reputation beyond the immediate area. The local skating community held fundraisers that covered Marcus's maintenance costs and then some. 3 other neighbors approached him about similar projects in their yards, recognizing the value of thoughtful renovation over expensive maintenance of aging features. Marcus's construction company received inquiries from municipalities interested in his design approach for public facilities. What had started as a defensive response to harassment had transformed into something legitimately beneficial for everyone involved. 2 months after opening, on a cold December afternoon, Marcus stood at his kitchen window with a beer, watching a dozen kids navigate the concrete bowls under supervisor guidance. Jennifer's 3 children were among them, laughing and falling and getting back up, normal kids enjoying a well-designed space. Jennifer herself had joined the volunteer parent rotation, helping supervise weekend sessions without complaint or demands. She'd even apologized publicly in the neighborhood social media group, admitting her earlier accusations had been false and praising Marcus for creating something the community desperately needed. The post had received 43 likes and 17 comments of support. Marcus had learned something unexpected through this entire experience. Revenge could be creative rather than destructive. Justice could serve broader purposes than simple punishment. And sometimes the best response to entitled demands wasn't to match hostility with hostility, but to transform the entire situation into something better than it had been before. Jennifer had wanted access to his pool for her children's entertainment. He'd given her something better, a space her children could share with others, under rules that taught respect, boundaries, and community cooperation. She'd wanted him to sacrifice his peace for her convenience. He'd created peace for everyone instead. The skate park hummed with activity as daylight faded, strings of safety lights illuminating the concrete surfaces. Marcus finished his beer, set the empty bottle on the counter, and smiled. His backyard had become something he'd never imagined when he'd first bought the house for that aging pool. It had become proof that property rights mattered, that boundaries could be enforced creatively, and that sometimes the most satisfying resolution to conflict wasn't winning at someone else's expense, but building something valuable from the ashes of attempted entitlement Jennifer had tried to take from him. He'd built something that gave to everyone, and in doing so, he'd won more completely than any legal battle or petty revenge could have achieved. Across town in the Oakmont Hills subdivision, Retired architect Elena Rodriguez was reviewing her home security footage with growing disbelief. Her HOA president, a man named Gerald Hutchins, who'd held his position for 12 consecutive years through intimidation and procedural manipulation, had just sent her a violation notice for the native wildflower garden she'd planted in her front yard. What Gerald didn't know was that Elena had designed 3/4 of the buildings in the municipal downtown core, including City Hall, and she'd spent the last month secretly working with the city council on updated landscaping ordinances that would fundamentally reshape HOA authority. She looked at the violation notice again, then at Gerald's smug signature, and reached for her phone. The city council meeting where they'd vote on her ordinance proposal was tomorrow night. Gerald was going to attend expecting to speak against a different measure.